All eyes this month have been on the US, with former President Donald Trump making a strong comeback, sweeping swing states in the presidential election and getting a strong hold in the Congress. As US looks for Trump administration 2.0, there are joys, but there are also fears within the country and around the globe. Some of Trump's major agendas have concerned the immigration and trade policies. How will his second term as the executive head of the most powerful nation in the world turn out for South Asia and especially for Nepal? That is what today's conversation will be around. Joining us today in Kantipur News Talk is Michael Kugelman, the director of South Asia Institute at the Wilson Center, who has closely watched US relations with a number of South Asian nations. Welcome to Kantipur News Talk.
Thank you. Great to be here with you.
You are here in Kathmandu for Kathmandu Conclave. Have you had time to settle down, enjoy Kathmandu culture, food?
I have, and I should say it's my first trip to Nepal, so it's been particularly special for me. And yes, it's been busy with a lot of meetings, a lot of engagements, but yeah, I have had time to experience the sights and to have some very good food.
And have you been enjoying it?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. And I'm not just trying to flatter you.
This election has been watched by the whole world. And it has been taken as a resurrection for Trump as well, given all the cases that he's been in and a lot of problems as well with court and cases. How has the general Americans viewed his comeback? What does it mean for general people in your country?
Well, I mean, he won the election fair and square in the sense that he got the popular vote. So clearly a majority of Americans voted for him. But he is, of course, a polarizing figure, as so many political leaders in so many countries are these days. So naturally there's quite a few people that are euphoric, and there are quite a few other people that are very unhappy and very upset because, you know, he is someone who has had and continues to have a number of policies, both domestic and foreign policies, that are quite controversial and concerning for many people.
One of the election agendas, or let's say his election announcements during the campaigns, was that once or if elected to the office, he would end the Russia-Ukraine war within 24 hours. Although he did not announce his plans on how he intends to do it, do you think it's possible, given that the current administration has been supporting Ukraine with a lot of aid, funds, and even weapons?
I mean, it's true that he wants to be that person that gets the war to end. I mean, he's made that clear for a very long time. But I think the question is not so much whether he would want to do it or whether he would want to follow through with this pledge, but more so how the belligerents would respond to this, right? I mean, I can't imagine at this point in time that the Russians or the Ukrainians would be willing to have a third party come in to try to negotiate an end to the war. But I'm fairly confident that he's going to try, that he's likely going to reach out to Putin, but I just don't know if the main belligerents think that this is something that they would agree to.
So it might not happen as he has announced, planned.
Well, I mean, he over the years, as you know, he's made a lot of pledges and a lot of promises. Some of them he's upheld, many of them he has not. But of course, isn't that common for political figures around the world?
Another major agenda during his election campaign was mass deportation of illegal immigrants. There are around 300,000 Nepalese living legally, but there are also many more that have taken the illegal routes in hopes of getting a better life in the US. What kind of policies do you think his administration will be bringing, and how do you think it would affect people from Nepal?
Yeah, so we don't know. I mean, it's early, just because you know, he's going to take office in a few months, and you know, he may say certain things, but we don't know what he'll actually follow up on. I think another important thing to watch out for here is who will be leading the policies, the immigration policies. You know, not just him, but in terms of those leading key bureaus and so on. We'll see, but I think that it's true that you know, given the fact that you have a number of Nepalese in the U.S. that could be concerned about the impacts of this, you know, I think that it's something that we should definitely keep an eye on. But, you know, I've said this before on a number of occasions. It's very difficult and indeed risky to try to make predictions about something or someone that's so unpredictable. And, you know, we might think that we have an idea what he would do based on the precedent of his 4 years as president previously, but who knows? He may turn around. He did depend on votes from a very large swath of American voters, and that includes, minority voters. So one might contend that he could change course a bit, but we don't know. We'll just have to see.
Should people, those aspiring to go to the US in South Asia and Nepal, be alarmed at all?
Alarmed by his return to power? His
immigration visions?
Right. Well, I think inherently there would be some concerns given what we've seen in the past, and given that the U.S. has long been a very welcome place for immigrants. And so if there's a view that that could change, and absolutely that should be a point for concern. But again, right now it's what, mid-November? He's going to take office in just over 2 months. I think in the next few weeks we'll get a better sense of what direction he really is going to take.
There are also speculations that the mass deportations that he claims is going to cost a lot, and he's recently also said it's not about the price tag. What do you think of it?
Which is striking, given that he is someone that's always about trying to save costs and always trying to do things on the cheap. I mean, this is something he's made a big theme of his foreign policy, that he thinks that the U.S. shouldn't have to pay as much to be a part of alliances, and that alliance partners should stick up, should do their part. So it does come across as a bit ironic, but perhaps it's a reflection of the urgency that he sees this particular issue.
Nepal and US have been sharing diplomatic relations for over 7 decades now.
Mm-hmm.
The two countries have partnered in many programs, and a few of them have also been highly controversial. One of them was Millennium Challenge Cooperation Nepal Compact. There was a lot of polarization even between political parties and also the public. Why do you think it was so sensitive of an issue?
Well, I mean, I think it's very clear that the U.S. government explicitly linked this grant to the Indo-Pacific strategy, and we know that Nepal does not want to risk being dragged into great power competition and the power games of the major powers. My own view is that it was a mistake for the U.S. to publicly link this this infrastructure grant to the strategy. Perhaps we wouldn't have had the controversy that we did had that not been the case. But I think that Nepal, like a number of other countries, tends to want to be non-aligned, exercise strategic autonomy, and not want to be in a position where they have to worry that they could be perceived as being in a particular camp. In this case, the U.S. camp. At the end of the day, this is an unnecessary concern, because clearly this is about providing infrastructure support. That's what it was always about. But I think that given the clear concerns about any type of outcome that could lead to worries about being clubbed with the U.S. and the implications that could have for Nepal's relations with China, I think that's where the controversy has come in. I'm glad that it's been operationalized. I'm glad that it's been implemented. But let me just say this as well. The U.S., as you say, has had a relationship with Nepal for many years. It's a very cordial relationship. And I think sometimes it's the more controversial aspects of the relationship that get the most attention, like the MCC grant. The U.S. has been providing various forms of assistance, development assistance in Nepal for many years, whether you're talking about cultural preservation programs or assistance to youth to bolster employment prospects. So there's a lot of that as well, and I think it's important to acknowledge that too.
You said something about it was kind of a mistake to go public about the MCC project. What do you mean by that?
Well, I mean, we all found out, so one way or the other, that it had been linked to the Indo-Pacific strategy. Why not just ensure that that doesn't make it into the public domain? Because it becomes a political issue once it appears in the press and so on. It's more difficult to manage the implications. So, I think that U.S. officials certainly understand the sensitivities now. So, I think it just would have been better and it would have made things less politically sensitive for Kathmandu had there not been that attempt to make that connection. Again, the U.S., as I understand it, does not view the MCC grant as something that has these deep strategic overtones. It's about infrastructure development. Yes, you can argue that it is, at the end of the day, meant to counter what China might aim to do with, BRI investments or whatever the case may be. But, at the end of the day, it's about infrastructure support. It's not about power politics.
But what about the transparency part of any project?
Oh, no, that's absolutely. There's something to be said for that. But if we're talking about a specific project, such as this grant, and if it was meant to just provide infrastructure support and not much else, what's the difference? But I see what your point. I absolutely understand, and one could argue that it's better to put it out in the public initially rather than have it come out later, so to speak. But I just think that given that the sensitivities were known about, it just, to me, I think it would have been better maybe not to say anything at all about it to interlocutors in Nepal, and just acknowledge that perhaps there would be a view that it has to be connected to great power competition in a broader sense, just because that's a key U.S. policy priority. But given we know how sensitive the Indo-Pacific strategy is here, and in other countries that are keen to balance relations with all the powers, the U.S., India, China, maybe it would have been better to say less rather than more. But absolutely, I take your point. Transparency is better than not saying anything at all. And indeed, it's ironic, it's notable that you say that, given that one of the main U.S. pitches that it's made with its projects and its investments, not just here, but throughout the Indo-Pacific, is that it's more transparent than anything China might put out there. But again, there the distinction is made between contractual obligations, the terms about how money comes through. The U.S. position is that China is much more opaque about that. So I think it's a different case.
Well, regardless of the controversies and criticisms, MCC is in implementation at the moment. But there's another program that has come to the fore that has once again caused controversy, the State Partnership Program. There are skepticism about it once again. What do you think about it? And
again, it's unfortunate. I mean, there doesn't need to be, but I understand that these are all very sensitive issues. And at the end of the day, my view is that there's sort of much ado about nothing, in the sense that there's no need to be concerned about it. But again, I acknowledge why that would be the case, given the sensitivities about what the U.S. is trying to do, its strategic objectives, and so on.
The past few years, we've all witnessed U.S. and China relations sour. They've had trade war to be in an evident form, while its relation with India has seemingly improved on the surface. How do you think U.S.'s relations with these two countries evolve as Trump takes office?
I mean, it's interesting, you go back just a few years, and U.S.-China competition was not particularly intense. Trump's first 2 years during his initial presidency, he was full of praise for, not for China as much, but for the Chinese president, for President Xi. And the U.S. did not oppose the Belt and Road Initiative back then, but things changed in a hurry during the latter part of Trump's term. The U.S.-India partnership's different. It's actually a lot simpler. I mean, there's been exponential growth in this partnership for several decades, driven by a number of things. Initially, and this all started after the India's liberalization reforms in the 1990s. That opened up opportunities for trade cooperation between the two. And then after the 9/11 attacks, counterterrorism became a big focus. But of course, it was the China issue that really drove partnership. But there's a lot to the U.S.-India relationship that has nothing to do with China. There's a lot of commercial cooperation that occurs on a completely separate track from partnership with China. Higher education engagements, science and technology. There's a lot going on. So I think Trump's return to power will bolster the U.S.-India relationship. Had Harris won, the relationship would have been in a good place too. There's multi-partisan support for it in Washington. But I think with Trump, what makes things a bit different from a Harris presidency is that he has this much ballyhooed chemistry with Prime Minister Modi. It's very clear. It's in great part because of their shared worldviews and political views. Also, some of the issues that had been cause for tension in the relationship during the Biden administration, I think those are going to go away with Trump. Russia was one of those issues. Trump appears to have a more restrained position on Russia compared to Biden and the Democrats. The human rights issue, the Biden administration had brought some attention to concerns about rights and democracy in India. I don't think that's something that Trump will focus on. So I think the relationship will be bolstered. Trade tensions could resurge. I mean, if there's one thing that Trump had said on the campaign trail about India, it was, he referred to tariff policies. And he actually described India as an abuser on the campaign trail, and he was referring to India's tariff policies. With China, I suspect that we'll see more of the same, in the sense that Trump has taken a very hard line on China, a very hawkish position, which is right where he left off when he ended his first presidency. That will likely continue. He's made his initial picks for his cabinet. Most of them are hawks on China as well. So I think we're going to see a pretty hard line stand. But as I said earlier, you can't predict what he might do. We can't rule out the possibility that he might decide to try to reach out to President Xi and try to reach an understanding to ease competition. I don't think that's going to happen. It's unlikely, but can't rule it out. As I think I said before, he's gone out of his way to praise President Xi. He seems to really admire him.
So only time will tell.
Exactly.
Nepal is situated in between India and China, these big nations. How do you think US's relation with these two countries affect Nepal?
Well, I mean, if you agree, as I do, that Trump's policy and approach to South Asia will be framed mainly by great power competition, that means that, if and when his administration chooses to consider the relationship with Nepal, it'll likely be seen through a great power competition lens. To be very candid, Nepal is not going to be a priority for President Trump. I mean, you're well aware of the media reports that came out during his first presidency that he really wasn't aware of Nepal at all and couldn't identify it on a map. So, I don't think that the bilateral relationship is going to be a priority for this administration, at least not initially. But I think that as we try to figure out how he's going to approach great power competition, is he going to try to push or pressure countries like Nepal that have good relationships with India, but also have these relationships with China? Is he going to try to put more pressure, apply more pressure than the Biden administration had on these countries to try to distance themselves a bit from China? I think that would backfire, just because you have countries around the region that are formally not aligned and want to have that strategic autonomy to have that flexibility to manage their relations with both countries. But if he were to do that, that I think could put Kathmandu in a bit of a tough spot, because we all know that even in the best of circumstances, it's a bit of a challenge for Nepal to manage these different relationships. But I think that there's certain tools that are in place now and will continue, I imagine, to be used by President-elect Trump. That includes things like the DFC, the Development Finance Corporation, which is basically the main U.S. government investment tool linked to the Indo-Pacific strategy. DFC is active here already. I imagine that he would be inclined to try to ramp up activities there in efforts to push back against what China might want to do with BRI. So that's one possibility.
Out of the total FDI stock that Nepal receives, US investments flare around 3%, less than 3%. What do you think of our policies here, and how do you think we can encourage more foreign direct investments from US?
I mean, the US tends to drive a hard bargain in the sense that it has its preferred trade and investment partners, and in this region, India is among them, of course. Plenty of strong trade partners in Southeast and East Asia. I think that it's difficult to get the attention of Washington if you're a country that's experiencing significant levels of economic stress with structural economic vulnerabilities. I think it's hard to get Washington's attention. That'll be even more the case once the Trump administration takes office. Trump is all about doing business, and that's a big part of his foreign policy approach. But he's not going to do it with a country that he thinks won't be able to give back much in return. He won't be interested in that. So, you look at the various economic challenges that Nepal faces. I mean, you know them much better than I do. I think that the Trump administration would likely want to see more indications that actions are being taken to address some of these long-standing issues. And I don't think that it's going to be the type of issue that the administration will be watching closely to see what changes. I think that, that Washington will conclude it has plenty of other partners that it can work with, that it can trade with. And as I said before, trade and investment is not the core component of U.S.-Nepal relations, right? I mean, you could look at a variety of other issues, like people-to-people ties, cultural ties, the development cooperation that I mentioned before. I think that the U.S. would have plenty of trade partners and countries where it wants to invest. But I'll say this, because of that great power competition lens, any opportunity to deploy more capital, whether through DFC or through other channels, to be more present in Nepal with these investments, that would be a good thing. And again, it is notable that we know that India is by far the largest portfolio for DFC in South Asia, but the fact that it is present with some modest investments in Nepal, that suggests that there could be more ahead. I think the Trump administration would not want to focus on things like clean energy, infrastructure, anything involving clean energy, climate change mitigation. I think he'd want to focus on other issues just because of his stated views on these issues. But that doesn't mean he wouldn't be receptive to more DFC investments. Though keep in mind as well that DFC first needs to be reauthorized by the U.S. Congress. I imagine it will be, but that of course has to happen first before we could talk about future DFC investments.
One of the many issues that divided voters was also the possibility that if Trump was elected, climate change agendas would take a backseat, as his administration did withdraw from Paris Agreement.
Right.
What do you think? Where do you think this is going ahead as he assumes office in January?
Yeah, I mean, there are few more important issues than this. Again, we don't know. We'll see how he handles things. I think that, again, we'll have to see who are the key officials that are going to be managing climate policy, environmental issues. There's been a lot of progress in the international climate negotiations over the last few years, including the agreement to, create an investment fund, so to speak, for climate change mitigation that the developed countries would contribute to. At the least, I think that his administration would be uncomfortable with that idea. I'm not sure that it would be a controversial issue for the U.S. Congress as well, but I'm not sure he'd be receptive to the idea of the U.S. providing assistance to global South countries, other countries that are deeply vulnerable to climate change, just to help them. I think there'd have to be some type of strong economic rationale for him as well. But yeah, I know that climate negotiators, climate experts, those focused on climate change policies around the world, everywhere, will be watching this issue very carefully, because this is just going to have such huge implications. And particularly given that we're talking about the U.S., one of the major emitters, and a country that had been receptive to the recent negotiations at the UN climate conferences about doing more to work with the rich countries, with the industrialized developed countries, to make sure that these global South countries that are not top emitters but are disproportionately impacted by climate change, that they would receive more help. These negotiations are very fraught, as I understand it. So any type of moving the needle forward is a good thing. But I think there will be concerns of many that if Trump takes the same position on these issues that he did when he was previously president, a lot of this progress could be undone.
Mr. Kugelman, thank you so much for your time and valuable thoughts.
Thank you.
And that is all for the moment in today's Kantipur News Talk. Thank you so much for watching as well.